for the European Foundation for Democracy, and as well he is the co-chair of the Communication and Narratives Working Group at the Radicalization Awareness Network, RAN, of the European Commission. Mr. Ritzman is also not only the research side of studying and analyzing and trying to give responses to prevent radicalization, but he also has experience firsthand as a practitioner as well, having been posted in Cairo, working as a senior advisor for the MENA region for the German Development Cooperation, and also at the Berlin State Parliament dealing with issues of radicalism and more hard security. So, Alexander, the floor is yours. You have about 12 minutes, more or less.
Thank you so much also for the kind introduction. It's hard to compete with the outside weather. I appreciate that you're all here. You mentioned the Radicalization Awareness Network. This is one of the hats I'm wearing today. I would rather take questions later. I'm sure all of you know in general what the network is doing. It's connecting practitioners all over Europe, facilitating exchange of good practices for inspiration. And there's lots to exchange, and transferability of experiences is of course a key challenge. And Ms. Udwin has mentioned RAN before, so I'm happy to take questions on this. I'm not going to focus on this on my remarks, because my other hat is the European Foundation for Democracy. I had prepared a presentation, but after looking at the survey and also after the first panel today, I adjusted it a little bit. So I hope that I'm as provocative enough to keep you inside this room, since I aim at offering some alternative interpretations of data and facts and all that comes with it. I will, though, focus on the European Union. On the territory, on the citizenship, on the people that live within the EU. We can talk about the neighborhood as well, and I might mention a few things, but my focus will be the territory and the citizens of the European Union. And before we go into addressing responses and their effectiveness, I think we need to be clear about drivers and root causes, right? We first need to know the reason why things happen before we start generating reactions to it. So it was mentioned before by Mr. Ayala, and I'm happy about it, that the strategy of terrorist organizations is to provoke overreactions and to increase polarization and distrust within societies for their political gain. And everybody knows this, but I like to re-emphasize this, because we need to understand why terrorists do what they do. They don't just like to kill people. They kill people for a reason, to scare us and to make us stupid, make us do stupid things. So we have to be aware of that when we go into policy advising and dialogue. Now, the EuroMed survey mentioned socioeconomic factors as the highest ranking key driver, root cause that pushes people into extremism. And it's obvious that socioeconomic conditions can be a relevant factor. But the research I know indicates that it's far away from being the most relevant, the key driver. If you would speak to the Soldiers of Odin, that's a neighborhood watch organization started in Finland, it's in Norway now, in Sweden, in Canada, in Germany. These are concerned citizens that march the streets looking for immigrants and refugees that might cause trouble. They are registered NGOs, and they're neither discriminated nor marginalized. They're just very angry and fearful, and they have an ideology that justifies what they want to do. If you look at Pegida, right-wing populist movement, if you look at their membership in Germany, they're not the ones that receive social welfare. They are middle-class people mostly, businessmen, lawyers, people who have access to resources, who are well integrated. Of course, they're not discriminated. They're mostly, organic Germans, if you want to have that term. But they are scared and angry, and they have an ideology that justifies and gives them legitimacy to act what they want. And just a small sidestep, Egypt. I lived in Egypt for 3 years, 2012 to 2015. I arrived when Morsi was elected, and I left when al-Sisi had everything back under control. The Brotherhood membership If you look at that membership, it's lawyers, businessmen, doctors, engineers. There's an interesting research done on the engineers of jihad that shows, and not just looking at one country, but worldwide, that the representation of engineers within extremist organizations, especially Islamist organizations, is 14 times as high as it should be compared to the rest of the population. So there is something going on. All these guys are not really discriminated. There are factors. They might be underemployed, they might be unhappy, there might be other factors, and I'll talk about that. Because what all these theories that explain radicalization and extremism are imperfect, but I like to focus on the push and the pull factors, to differentiate what makes an individual open to extremism and what then an extremist organization has to offer to that person to actually make that step. And this is so important that we do this right, because we have limited resources, we have limited time, limited money. It's always great to work on socioeconomic improvements, and we all should do that. But the question is, should this be funded by prevention or countering extremism? That's the only question I would like to address. And I see the tricky part of sometimes not being clear what is correlation and what is causality. So if I look at one specific country and I say, okay, 50% of those who are engaged in extremism are somewhat poor, I might come to the conclusion that poverty is a driver, a causality. But it might also just be a correlation. If you look at the other country next door, where 50% or more have higher degrees and are well educated and are members of the same or similar organizations. Figuring out what is correlation and what is causality is the key in effective policy advising, and that's something we're doing or trying to do at the European Foundation for Democracy. So if you look, for example, Europe again, Islamists in Belgium are disproportionately undereducated. That's actually a fact. However, in the UK, foreign policy grievances are being pushed as main factors of radicalization and identity crisis. In Germany, most who joined the Islamic State had committed criminal offenses before, while in France, discrimination of migrants, of Muslims, is being highlighted as a dominant factor. In the Netherlands, there are studies that indicate that mental illness is a key driver of a significant portion of those who join Islamist extremists. So what do we do with this? What does connect the engineer to the petty criminal, the A-grade high school student, female, to the mentally ill? What are these things that kind of make sense out of this diversity of factors? And how do we explain that there are so few terrorists if socioeconomic factors and discrimination are drivers? I don't know if you've ever been to Brussels or to parts of Germany. If you would take this as a key driver, we would have other numbers. So I'm not saying that these factors are not relevant, I'm just saying they are not the most relevant, and that we should not invest most of the resources that we have in the prevention and countering of violent extremism budgets in it. Now, I have to boil things down. I have to make things that are complex, less complex, to communicate them, right? I cannot give you a 6-hour lecture now, because you would not stay here, you would go into the sun outside to listen. I have to boil things down when we do policy advising to practical suggestions. So in this kaleidoscope of push and pull factors that has been identified after 20 or 30 years of research, spending €1 billion or so in a broader context, with the final result that the research is inconclusive and that more research needs to be done, we need to boil things down to do policy actions. And one would be looking at networks and hotbeds. The majority of recruits in many European countries, up to 80%, that have been drawn to the so-called Islamic State were recruited to some sort of network, family network, Salafist network. There was a structure that was visible. They were not secret meetings. There were organizations like Sharia for Belgium. There were like the Lease, the READ campaign in Germany. We have similar things in Great Britain and in France. These were organizations or groups or charismatic individuals advocating a specific worldview, an ideology, here in this context based on an interpretation of religion, but in other contexts, if you look at right-wing extremism in Germany or other European countries, religion is of no relevance at all, but you still have recruiting networks. So there are recruiting networks that are visible but have been underestimated because what they do is not necessarily illegal. So governments cannot really act before something that is punishable by law has been committed. So how do we intervene before the crime has been committed? That's one question I'm trying to answer. The second thing is ideology. I've heard today again that it doesn't play a role or not a big one. I beg to differ, because with ideology I don't mean religion. I mean a set of worldviews that is based on perceived truth, that explains the world and that gives simple answers to complex challenges, offers a new life, a reason to fight for something or against something. Ignoring this is I think, a little bit, it would be sort of ignorant or arrogant of me to say ideology doesn't count, because this would mean that everybody wants to live the life I live. Everybody wants to work from 9 to 5, as if I would do that, but is in general. Wants to have a small house and go on vacation 3 times a year, and that's the life. A lot of people want a different life. They want a different society. They find this society not appealing, and we have to respect them with their knowledge. We can't just say they are sick or stupid. They don't get it what we like. Some people just like something else. And their way to express that is through ideology, and not just as an evil narrative that, you know, takes over the mind of people. That's one way maybe of ideology. Other is as an enabler, as a toolkit that empowers people who felt not well before, but feel better with this kind of ideology wrapped around their shoulders. So its ideology is a pull factor, pulling people into extremism, but it can also be a push factor, enabling me to feel stronger, more important, more relevant, more focused. As an example, if you beat up in your neighborhood someone else and you take their jacket or their money because it makes you feel stronger, you'll be considered a criminal and an outcast, and you will not have a lot of fans. If you beat him up because he is a Muslim, or not a Muslim, or not the right kind of Muslim, you will receive praise and respect from your in-group based on the ideology. So the same action, the same tendency, in one context is outcast, is in the other context a qualification that improves your status. This has to do with ideology. Now, the Islamic State is a tricky phenomenon, I find, because if we only look at it, it really seems to attract everyone. Al-Qaeda always had standards you had to apply at the beginning. They were not interested in people with nothing to offer. They said, you cannot join, we are an elitist organization. Well, the Islamic State says everybody's welcome, everybody's coming, and that's, I think, the special thing about this kind of ideology is that they're not just against something. They're not just saying, let's fight the big Satan and the little Satan and the crusaders and everybody else. They're for something. You can build something. You can defend someone. And this is something that makes their narrative, I think, more attractive than other narratives that are similar, but the state building, the caliphate aspect seems to have triggered a lot more emotions within people than a very similar narrative by Al-Qaeda that just was missing that caliphate notion. The Al-Qaeda also wants a caliphate, the Brotherhood wants a caliphate, but the so-called Islamic State wants it now. And that's the difference, and they're also very good at propaganda, and we can talk about that. So final point, what should be done concretely to counter, if we say within this complex kaleidoscope of factors, we identify something that is relevant in most countries for most extremists. It's recruiting networks and hotbeds. It's never the case that in every city there's a similar amount of extremists. you always have a city that is comparable in socioeconomic and other circumstances that produces no or one or two extremists, and other cities who produce 30, 40, 50. And this is connected to recruiting networks that have been working for a long time, usually, to breed and groom people, and then to activate them when the timing is right. So not waiting for that to happen is one of the lessons. Empower civil society, empower the good guys, and this has actually been mentioned in the communication of the Commission, to give the moderates, I'm not a big fan of the word moderate, but I'm using it here because it's in the communication, a voice. There are thousands of successful alternative narratives out there that keep people who would be affected by all kinds of factors that promote extremism, injustice, discrimination, lack of purpose, and they have the access to the propaganda, but they don't go. Why don't they go? We need to understand better why people don't go, instead of only focusing on the 0.00001% who actually go. So there is a set of resilience factors, of narratives, of positive networks that make people not go, that face all the factors that others who go face as well. So this is something for us to understand and to learn and to put into more research, I think. I'm also a big fan of research. So final sentence, empowering the good guys within the communities that produce a lot of extremists is key. And this could be right-wing extremism in the north of Germany or in the east or in the west or wherever, or in Molenbeek in Belgium or in other places all over the world. Identify those who want to speak up against the recruiters, those who preach or advocate for extremist ideologies, give them a platform, train them, connect them. This is some of the work we're doing and that we're trying to do even more to increase the resilience of the communities that are under threat of radicalization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexander. A lot of interesting information, and I'm sure that during the debate we'll have time to explore a bit more some of the points that you already raised. Our next speaker is Omar Shaban, who is the founding and the director and founder of the PAL Think for Strategic Studies, a think tank based in Gaza, Palestine. He's an analyst on the political economy of the Middle East, and he's a regular contributor to international magazines, newspapers, participating in conferences on political and economic issues such as Palestinian affairs, reconstruction of Gaza, reconciliation issues within Palestinian fractions, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation. Omar, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Hazem. Thank you to everybody. I will try to compete with the previous speaker. I construct my presentation as a key point, as bullet point, and I think I invite you to agree on 3 or 4 points about violent extremism. First of all, this is not a new phenomenon. It's old, it has been there all the time. It's born and made. Some violent extremism born in some area, and some others were benefiting from outside and external phenomena. It's not confined to the Middle East. It's everywhere. It has been Latin America and Asia and Japan and China. We need to agree on this because this will help us on drawing the strategy to respond. Let me present my observation on through reading and through interaction in Gaza and other region about this phenomena. First of all, the term fission. There are some people who become radicals in Gaza, not because they are connected to somebody in Iraq, but because they like to imitate something. They like to imitate something in Paris. So they don't know much. They don't know what they do it, but they just want to be part of a fashion. Second, hope. being radicals does not mean there is zero hope. I think, or I believe that being radicals, because these radicals have 100% hope that by being radicals, they will have a solution for their problems. They fed up with being moderate, they did not find any solution, so they decided to go to the wrong direction, hoping by being radicals or by killing others, this will change the situation. Third, revenge. There are many radicals, either in Gaza or in Sinai, who become radicals because they want to get revenge of somebody else or another group. They don't believe, they are not well educated about why the radicals, but because they were injustice, they were treated badly, so they decided to be radicals in order to find a legitimacy to kill others. Fourth, the adaptability, flexibility, they change. They are much quicker, much faster than us in changing the names, alliances, which make it very difficult for us, for security, to track. You hear maybe 20 groups in Gaza and the Sinai. You don't know which one comes first. You see that this group were under that umbrella, and the second month or the following month they became under the other umbrella, which prove again that there is no clear ideology, a clear strategy. They just want to be radicals under any other names. Fifth, OBM, I call it, other people mistake. They don't have a strategy, they don't have clear, detailed why they are radicals, but they are against the others. The others made a huge mistake, either the state or the liberal or the political party or the business community. They feel discomfort, so they use the other people's mistake to fuel their narrative. As I said all the time, the less mistake we do, the less fuel they will get. But unfortunately, our leadership, not in Palestine, everywhere, they do a lot of mistakes, which give them a lot of energy. If we talk about response, and of course we need to think about the preventive measure, not only to response, but we need to go deeper into things. I do believe that there are enough memories in the history of the Islamic State, the Middle East, that fuel these radicals. We hear a lot about Ibn Taymiyyah and about some Islamic scholars who pave the way or give enough narrative to those radical groups to act aggressively against others. Many groups in Iraq, they justify what they are doing by what has been said by Islamic scholars some centuries ago. But we need to agree on something that they are not the same. I don't agree with this, that all the radical group in Europe, in Paris, in Beirut, in Gaza, in Sinai are the same. If we talk about lack of democracy in Egypt, we cannot talk the same thing on Sinai. There was no democracy, it's a tribe society. They haven't been living in a democratic environment, so they don't miss if there is no democracy. So the radicals in Sinai is not the same in Gaza, not in the same in Beirut, in Lebanon, not in the same in Iraq. So each reality has its own speciality. This is why there is no one solution or a generic solution that could apply to all. Two phenomena that we see is that they, comparing to those who are fighting the terrorism, is the radicals are much better, much quicker in using the social media. They use it in promoting their propaganda, they are recruiting new members. You find somebody in Gaza who work with somebody in Iraq, although he has never been out of Gaza, has never been. There was no any connection between Gaza and Iraq or Gaza and Syria. And suddenly we hear somebody from Gaza was killed last week in Iraq or last week in Sinai. We don't know how this happened or how was recruited, of course, through the social media. Second, they use much better than the globalization, the open border. they act, they move freely, while the normal people like myself, they need many visas and many passports to move or to come to Europe from Gaza. I need 5 permits. The others, they move much quicker than us. As an Arab, as a Palestinian, of course, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has fueled the tendency towards radicalization. The chronic problem between Israel and Palestine has been used, not now, not in the 15 years ago, but so many times, by Bin Laden, by Saddam, by the dictatorship in the Arab. They were using Palestinian cause to suspend democracy, not to make reform, and not to make economic development in their country, because they were telling their people, not now, we are busy in liberating Palestine. This was Saddam and Bashar said, and they never liberate Palestine and nor bring democracy to their country. So Palestine has been used by the bad people, giving them excuse not to do the right job. Of course, we have a new group who accused the Islamists that they are not Islamic enough. For example, in Gaza we have Hamas, but now we have another group who accuse Hamas, you are not Islamic enough, or you are not Muslim enough, or you are not doing as you have been teaching us before. So I think as an Arab we need to be serious, we need to look at our history, we need to look at our education. Palestine is a historical place, we have Christian community in Gaza, but I never told in the school that there is a Christian living beside me in Gaza city, which is 10 kilometers. We told about Christianity came to Palestine, but we never told that there are Christian people, doctors, engineers living in our society. When my son joined Christian school in Gaza, I did this intentionally because it's the opportunity for him to interact with his Palestinian Christian people in Gaza. In the afternoon, when he came back to his cousins or to his uncles, they were asking him how they look like. So we were not told that our society is mosaic. Palestine used to be a Christian country, and we have a Christian community who don't like to call themselves minority because they are Palestinian. So we need to improve our education. Of course, the failure of the state to bring democracy, to bring prosperity, to bring equal opportunity. And you in Europe talk about integration or lack of integration, but also there are lack of integration within the societies. For example, in Sinai, there is lack of integration of some tribe and Bedouin within the system. In Palestine, there is unequal treatment between refugee and non-refugee, people in the Area C in the West Bank, and those who live in Ramallah. There is a lot of inequality that fuel the feeling of injustice and inequality between citizens. So the state in the Middle East is not a state for all citizens. We need to open dialogue with youth. 60% of Palestinian society, like everywhere, are youth. Gaza is 2 million people. 65% of the Gaza are under 25 years old. For the past 10 years, 99% of them have never been outside. So these people will become 20 years old. When the siege was imposed in 2007, they were 10 years old. So this is what I keep saying even to the Israeli policymakers. How come you expect a youth who live in abnormal situation to be normal? They are in prison. They have this siege mentality. They cannot be nice victims. No victim can be nice. If you put somebody in the prison under siege, no jobs, no access to travel, no access to good education, the output should be expected. This is why what's happening in the Arab world is very destructive, but is not surprising. We failed to build a modern, equal, democratic state when we got rid of the colonization in the 1950s. Now we have in Palestine 22 years since Oslo. Some Palestinians want the occupation to come back. Not because we love the occupation, not because we don't love our national slogan, but our political system has failed to build a democratic state. We have no election since the past 10 years. And we are much poorer than before. and the gap between the rich and the poor are much higher. The middle class has disappeared, while in Gaza we have people who don't have something to eat, but there are people who have a lot of millions of dollars. So we failed in building prosper, equal society. From my experience and dealing with, I'm not dealing with them, but because we live in the society where they are there, and this is caring for us. If you compare this to Gaza, I'm talking to you from personal experience. Some 20 years ago, Gaza was an open, liberal place. People were going around. Gaza was rich. The GDP of Gaza was much better than the Middle East. We used to export so many things. But now the situation become very scary for people like me to live there, because the people become narrow-minded. People become suspicious about anything. We are the exceptional. They are the majority, and we are the exceptional. We need to make two things of when we develop the education and the media, is that they kill women, they kill innocent people, they kill children. Most of their attacks, they are targeted to innocent people. Look what happened in Iraq or in Syria. So we need to make use of this, that these people are not against the state, although they appear to be against the state, but the victims are from the normal people. Second is, there is no strategy, there is no detailed plan. Yes, they want to have an Islamic state, but there is no detailed plan. If you ask them about water, about Gaza will be 2050 will be for 4.5 million people. We are now 2 million. They don't have an answer. When I ask them about 90% of the Gaza water is not drinkable, they told me, Omar, you need to believe in God. God will solve all the problems. As if God working only for us. So there's a lot of weaknesses. If we are strong enough, we can challenge their narrative, and we can prove to the youth that these are not good representation to them. But the last statement what I want to say is, we need to look again into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and to give Palestinian and even those in Sinai prosperity, and we need to move from confrontation to cooperation. This area has a lot of resources, even in Gaza, even in Sinai, even Palestine. We can easily, without a lot of support, but we need a political solution to change the situation from confrontation and killing to cooperation and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omar, for your thoughtful remarks and for linking the regional environment also to the Gaza situation and experience and the road ahead, hopefully. Our next speaker is Mustafa Al-Sagizli. He is the founder and the general manager of the Libyan Program for Reintegration and Development, which is part of the Prime Minister's office. And this program is in charge of disarming, providing training, and supporting the reintegration of former combatants into professional life. And I've heard that there have been thousands of people who have gone through this program in Libya. Mr. Sagizli, before taking up the position, was a deputy minister of the Interior in Libya's transitional government. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to take you a bit more to the ground, more to these violent extremists, as in the end, as part of our societies. And I will refer to the Libyan context. Violent extremism, as we all know, has root causes. It has, if we look at a holistic approach, it has many factors and many causes that turn a young person into a violent extremist. In Libya, one of the main causes of violent extremism was political exclusion. You all know that Libyans lived under a dictatorship for 42 years, one-man rule, who chose to have one color flag one book that he wrote as our constitution that we needed to follow in every minute of our lives. A complete dictatorship, a one-man show, you can say. So political exclusion, Libyans were not able, or youth were not able to participate in building their country or their future. So this is this injustice and this exclusion is an important factor in breeding these violent extremists in Libya. Socioeconomic grievances. Usually people, according to the wealth of their country, their resources, expect a certain way of life. Libya was a rich country, oil, gas producing, minerals on the Mediterranean, 6 million people, a large country, but the people were poor in comparison to other countries, oil producing countries like the Gulf countries. So socioeconomic grievances, and when I say grievances, I would like also to refer to what Brigadier General Ayala has said, hatred. Grievances turn into hatred. And hatred is the worst thing that a young, uneducated man could have in his heart with an arm. So this is the causes that really breed these terrorists. Ideological and cultural issues. When you have a country that is ruled by a dictator, there is only one interpretation to everything, including religion. Therefore, we had in Libya, for example, we had the Maliki madhab, which is a moderate madhab. We call it the school of goals or maqasid in North Africa. When Gaddafi came to power, he closed all Islamic university, meaning Islamic education universities. And the only source of education was either from Gaddafi as the highest philosopher in Libya, or you could get it from tapes, later on internet, or books coming from the Gulf region and other schools of thought. Historical grievances, and this is important for researchers. There are some grievances in our region. You in Europe, you must take them into consideration and research and study them. For example, in Libya, Omar al-Mukhtar is our hero. Omar al-Mukhtar fought colonial Italy, fought fascist Italy. These grievances are still there. Many of the Libyan youth who have not traveled, who have not seen anything diverse, they only know Libya, which is 100% Muslims, all Arab speaking. They have not seen other than their society. Hold these grievances. We have to address these grievances as nations. I know in Libya there was a good step that was taken a while ago where we had an agreement with Italy, and according to this agreement there was development plans for Libya and addressing many of these old grievances. Wrong interventions. Wrong interventions are, you know, if you have somebody who is ill and you give him the wrong medicine, then he will become in a worse situation. And the wrong interventions are mainly the security and military interventions done by security institutions that don't abide by law and by human rights. So these interventions give these violent extremists the reason to continue and the reason to actually recruit more people. And it is a clear rhetoric. These are oppressors, these are wrongdoers, join us to fight them. So this is how they recruit young people. I will pass by the implications of violent extremism and these groups on Europe, and this is really important for the Europeans to understand this and the thinkers in Europe to take these issues into consideration, because now they don't matter only in our society. They don't affect Libya or the MENA region or the Arab countries or the Islamic countries. Now, these groups will affect Europe in its heartland. We are in a global village. Internet has made us closer. Proximity to Europe, for example, Libya, between Libya and Italy or Greece or many of the European countries, the Mediterranean. And now the Mediterranean, it's becoming very easy to pass it and to go on the other side. Immigration, recruitment and breeding that's happening on both sides. We found, for example, in Libya, many members of Daesh have come from Europe and vice versa. Cross-border smuggling, drug trafficking and human trafficking, these are all issues that they impact us in Libya, but they also impact Europe. I think, and this is my main talk, is about how to counter violent extremism and how to address these root causes. A famous politician, an American politician, has described the issue of terrorism and violent extremism as it is like a swamp. If you want to fight cholera or fight the diseases brought by these swamps, you don't kill the mosquitoes, you dry the swamp. So these causes are the swamp. How can we dry the swamp? There are many solutions, but I think on the priority, especially in Libya, and we have tried it through our organization of de-radicalization and reintegration, that many of these youth, they join these groups because of their maleducation, because of their misunderstanding of Islam and Islamic values. Many of them, when you enter into dialogue with them, debate, negotiations, you can save them or you can rescue them from these ideas. And by the way, in our culture, the first violent extremist group that was established in the Islamic world after Prophet Muhammad in the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib was called Al-Khawarij. And these Khawarij, they came out with an idea that Ali, who is the cousin of the Prophet, who is one of his companions, was not Muslim enough because of the idea of what they called Al-Hakimiyya, that rule should be, God is the ruler. Therefore, Ali should not interfere in certain things, especially when he entered into the famous debate with Muawiyah and so on. But I would like to refer you to this, Google it. It is the debate between Abdullah ibn Abbas, who is the companion of the Prophet, and who is the greatest scholar of the time, with Al-Khawarij. If you read this debate and dialogue, negotiations with them, in the end he managed to rescue 25% of this Khawarij violent extremist group through dialogue that took a few hours. So ideological factors are important, and dialogue, I know that my colleague spoke about taboos. I know it's a taboo to have dialogue or negotiations or even to have debates with these violent extremist groups or their leaders. But if we want to rescue our youth, if we want to make sure that we bring solutions to this phenomena, we must open dialogue, negotiations with these groups. And by the way, let's be sincere with each other. Didn't the Europeans do it with the IRA? Isn't Colombia doing it now with FARC? So why not in our region? We need to find solutions, and this is one of the important solutions. It doesn't have to be government to terrorist organization. It can be a third party. Many NGOs, many civil society organizations can do this work. I know that ETA is an example also. It has entered into negotiations through a third party and so on. So negotiations should not be a taboo. We must find ways to rescue many of these young people. Again, negotiations will lead to some political inclusion. Many of these groups, what made them hold their weapons is that the venues for political inclusion was closed. And this is also important to understand that I am Libyan. If I don't get a chance to participate in politics as a group or a young person or whatever, then I will hold my weapon to fight for my right. This is Che Guevara and others. This is something that we all must understand. So the idea of bringing dictators to the region to build stability must be out of discussion. Bringing dictators will only stabilize the country for a short term. Then things will become worse. So the other important solution is reintegration, economic and socio-economic reintegration. And I'm glad that in the survey there is a clear emphasis on the solutions of socio-economic reintegration. Entrepreneurship, small and medium enterprises. We tried this. We had a survey in Libya with these ex-combatants, and we found out that 43% of them were willing to lay down their weapon for a small business. So entrepreneurship in general is very attractive, especially to these young enthusiasts. They are entrepreneurs actually, but entrepreneurs in other areas. How we can transform them to be entrepreneurs for economic development. The last that I would like to conclude with is security sector interventions. Security sector interventions are important. You need to secure the people, you need to enforce the law, but the institutions that are to implement these solutions must be institutions that abide by the law, must be institutions that abide by human rights. You cannot fight and combat terrorism or violent extremism with institutions that serve a dictator and torture people in prisons and are themselves, in my opinion, terrorists. I mean, the act of terrorism doesn't have to come from a violent extremist. It can come from a dictator. Therefore, security sector reform is very important. In fragile countries and conflict-affected countries, as my country, in conclusion, state building, rebuilding the institutions, peace building through dialogue and negotiations, state building, institution building, security sector reforms, good governance, combating corruption, rebuilding the institutions, rebuilding the economic, socio-economic institutions are a solution. Final word, I'd like to give a small example of Libya and Morocco. On February, 2011, we started our revolution, and Gaddafi decided to fight us with all the weapons that he had. While in February, I remember that Morocco, they wanted to have the revolution, but their king opened dialogue between the people who wanted to revolt and the state. And in the end, they had the constitutional reforms. They opened the country for political inclusion. We know who is now leading the government in Morocco. And socio-economic, again, small business and so on, socio-economic reintegration. They have made their peaceful reforms. While in Libya, because we were confronted with a dictator who wanted to use weapons and violence against us, you see what happened to Libya. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mustafa. We have some time now for debate, so I will take 3 questions. If you could please introduce yourselves and brief questions and who you're addressing. Yes, Patricia, right there. Yes, that's her. And back there, Jean-François.
Is it? Is it? It is. Sorry.
Yes, it's working.
Patricia Sasnal, the Polish Institute of International Affairs. No, I'm excited because the panel was really good. It's a sort of a similar question that you were asking yourselves that was asked in the previous panel. So the two panels are sort of talking about the same thing again, which is interesting because you guys are having different perspectives. But I'm particularly drawn by what Alexander said, because you painted a kaleidoscope of causes and correlations or correlates that push people to radicalization or extremism. And it's flattering because this is what we did at EuroMeSCo as well in our study last year. We exactly painted a matrix of 4 different categories of causes that push people to do that. What I think was missing maybe a little bit is this differentiation between what is happening in Europe and what is happening in the Middle East, because there's a certain level of analysis that would show us this difference. That out of this various matrix of reasons, perhaps the deprivation factors are more present in the Middle East than they are in Europe. And yet still, even though in Europe they may not be so prevalent, we might be looking at deprivation from a wrong angle. Because there's this concept of relative deprivation that was developed, for instance, by Robert Gore in his very famous book, Why Men Rebel, in the 70s. And he would say that it's what we envy other people for. You don't have to be really abjectly poor to envy other people. You can be wealthy and still envy other people something. So that's the concept of relative deprivation. Because of, you know, the connectivity, globalization, we envy people very different things. We can envy the Americans even though we're in Europe. Okay, we don't envy them anything these days. But it's just a thing that I am putting on the table, and that's a remark, and I have also a question, because you stopped your, you stopped your intervention at the most interesting moment. You asked, what do we do before they commit a crime? Or what can be done before they commit a crime? So have you come to conclusions? What can be done before they commit a crime?
Thank you. We will take 2 more questions and then go back to the panel. Jean-François at the back.
Jean-François Daguzan, Deputy Director of the Foundation of Strategic Research at Paris. Jean-François Daguzan, Directeur adjoint de la Fondation pour la recherche stratégique à Paris. I shall speak in the 2 languages. Je parlerai dans les 2 langues. We developed last year for information a prototype program on deradicalization for the Ministry of Justice with volunteer prisoners in the prison of Fresnes, close to Paris. Essentially, some elements for Mr. Ritzman. In France, from the last 5 years, we have around 10 to 15 studies about the radicalization processes. And the main factor is not absolutely the socio-economic question. It has to be understood very clearly. We have, of course, the question of banlieue evoked before. We have the problem of some communities around the big city. That's the reality. But the main elements coming from this study showed that the question of identity is the core of the radicalization. That's extremely clear. And the question of discrimination and injustice is a very special pattern for the radicalization of women. We are much more aware of the question of refugee, Syrian massacres, attempt against Islam, and so on. And we have around 15 to 20% of women radicalized, depends of the years. So we have to be very conscious of that question, the socio-economic question, which is, of course, one of the elements, is only a part of them. It is a mix between the question of identity, the position of himself inside the society, and the correlation with the feeling of his own life purpose, that is to say, to have something to give a sense of his life. And last point, we must very clearly understood that radicalization in France and in Europe more globally is a mix finally between various problems. And the question of jail, which is quite interesting, because in the last 10 years ago, the question of radicalization was essential, radicalization in jail was one of the main causes of the radicalization as a whole, but now it is only 1/4 of the radicalized by jail processes. Merci. Et très rapidement, donc, en français, la question de la radicalisation en France est maintenant à peu près bien connue à travers 10 ou 15 études officielles et officieuses venant des ministères et de quelques centres de recherche. L'essentiel aujourd'hui de la question a bien été identifié autour de la question de la dignité, beaucoup plus que des causes socio-économiques. Et la question de la prison, qui était surdominante il y a 10 ans, devient seulement un des éléments de cette partie. Et dernier point, les femmes, en revanche, qui se radicalisent, 14 à 20% aujourd'hui en France, selon les années, les motifs relèvent essentiellement des questions justement de discrimination et d'injustice, la Syrie, le sort fait à l'islam, et non pas, et beaucoup plus que les hommes, par exemple. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-François, pour tes commentaires et pour la traduction aussi. Let me take one last question for this first round, and there are other people who've asked also for a second round of questions. So please, if you could introduce yourself here at the front.
Merci beaucoup, donc Delphine Borion de l'Union pour la Méditerranée. Merci pour ces débats extrêmement, enfin ces analyses très, très pertinentes toute la matinée qui montrent effectivement toute cette diversité des causes qui, je pense, varient, et je crois que c'était très intéressant, Monsieur Ritzman, ce que vous disiez, selon les pays, et bien évidemment, varient entre le nord et le sud de la Méditerranée. Et donc l'importance d'apporter une réponse diverse et en même temps qui traite de l'ensemble de ces questions, parce qu'on ne peut pas séparer les questions de dignité des questions aussi de socio-économiques qui sont liées. Et donc tous ces facteurs à la fois économiques et culturels sont très importants. Et je crois que cette dimension culturelle, peut-être ce serait intéressant que vous l'approfondissiez, puisque je pense que la réponse, elle ne peut être que culturelle de façon très, très large. Et puis une autre question sur le rôle des femmes, parce qu'on voit bien combien il y a eu un appel pour que le rôle des femmes soit plus pris en compte dans le traitement des conflits, dans la gestion, dans la vie quotidienne, dans la vie politique, la vie économique, et certainement une plus grande intégration des femmes dans ces différentes dimensions de la vie politique et de la vie publique, je pense est une réponse aussi par le rôle qu'elles ont au sein de la famille, au sein de l'éducation et plus généralement de la vie. Et donc, quelles sont vos propositions à cet égard?
Merci. So let's go back to the panel, and I think some of the comments were made addressing Alexander.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very appreciative of the presentations of my colleagues, because the discrepancy could have not been bigger, right, to what I said. And then you look at Gaza and you look at Libya, we could add Somalia or Afghanistan. And of course, socioeconomic conditions there have a real impact on, let's say, career decisions or life decisions. If maybe one of the only resources of income for your family is joining some extremist organization, who could say that's not a very important factor? But I was talking about Europe, just to repeat this. And also, unfortunately, I have to make it a bit more confusing. Now, let's imagine Gaza and Libya would turn into Germany tomorrow. Germany has basically no unemployment. We are at 5%, meaning that we're actually looking for people. There is social security to a degree that is unseen in the world, apart from some northern neighbors. There's security, stability, freedom of press and speech. There's a justice system. There's everything. And the polarization within society is increasing. You have more people that get angry and hateful and that stand up against the other. If you look at the US, same thing. If you want to see a polarized society that has everything to a degree, look at the US. And this is the tricky part. So even if these marginalized and in terrible condition countries would be switched overnight into almost perfect situations, would the ideologies go away that also are a factor, and other factors that we have discussed? And that's just my issue. So, of course, education is a big factor, and families. Families can radicalize or de-radicalize. Education can, depending on who does the education, generate critical thinking, or the opposite of critical thinking, paternalistic structures and no thinking, desired. So we have to talk about values in this context. We have to not shy away from making judgment calls. And it's not that everybody wants the same thing. I have to repeat this. There are competing ideologies. And if we look at the time scale, and not just the last 5 years or 10 years, but the last 100 years or 120 years, we know that ideologies matter, and there are different ways how societies should be constructed from the perspective of different people. And we just need to consider this as a key thing. If we briefly speak about Egypt, coming back to the question, why are there so few terrorists? Out of the maybe 90 million Egyptians, maybe 80 million are Sunni, estimate. Out of them, maybe half is considered youth, which makes 40 million. Half of them are unemployed or underemployed. Maybe it's more like 60 or 70%, but for simplicity. So that's 20 million people. And if we take away the women, that's 10 million. 10 million angry, undereducated, underprivileged, in some way discriminated young men just across the pool. Why are they not marching towards Europe? Right? So are the conditions really the driver? What are the resilience factors that keep people in their local context, that make them listen to also moderates, that make them listen to alternative voices? And that's my final point. Those voices need to be empowered. They need to be trained and connected and funded. Every community has reasonable people that speak up or want to speak up against those who preach hate and extremism. But we're focusing on the hate and extremism people and not on the good guys. If we would just take 10% of the security budget and do that in the promotion of civil society organizations, I think we would have an increase in mid to long-term security, absolutely. Raising awareness about ideologies. Of course, there's a discussion going on. Should we support brotherhood organizations in Europe, for example? Should we task Muslim Brotherhood organization with the integration of Syrian refugees? And some will say yes, of course, because they kind of have a similar thinking. But many Syrian refugees will say, I didn't flee from Syria to now face the Brotherhood here. And of course, the Brotherhood might not integrate them in German society, but in some sort of parallel or counter society, depending on which stream. Same with Salafism. So I think we have to empower the right people, not just NGOs in general, but the right. We don't want to empower the soldiers of Odin, right? They're an NGO that is doing neighborhood work. We're not going to empower them, would be my point, and I also don't want to have Brotherhood or Salafists empowered. I want to have people who say you couldn't be a Muslim and a German and an Italian and whatever. You have different identities. That was raised, the psychological issues. The relative deprivation is a key thing, comparing yourself to others. That is why still so many Germans are upset, despite the fact they have everything. But they see someone who has more, and they are afraid that someone might take it away from them. Now, let's bring up a policy addressing psychological issues, right? They are not sick. These people are not mentally sick, but they have a tendency towards leaning towards authoritative structures. That's usually what people have who are interested in Islamism or right-wing extremism. We have a couple of cases where people point to right-wing extremism, and it wasn't harsh enough for them, so they turned to Salafism. That's actually a growing number of young men who go through these extremist ideologies until they find something that fits their purpose. So we have to put this all into consideration, and as I said, empowering the good guys will make a big difference, I think.
Thank you, Alexander, for those comments. Yes, we have 3 more questions, and let me ask you to be brief. We have only 10 minutes left. Fuad, George, and Jawad.
Thank you very much, Fouad Amour from Gers, Morocco. I just want to remind you that we have conducted a study, the same more or less last year, about terrorism in the region, MENA region. And it is very important to notice that some conclusions, we have reached the same conclusions, and this is very important. I would like to highlight the importance of some methodological elements, factors that have been highlighted in this panel. Very important, for instance, from causality to correlation. And it depends. Sometimes correlation could shift to causality and vice versa, of course. This is very important. And I would like to say that this panel has, of course, put an emphasis on the diversity of the situations. Of course, that's why it's very important to be prudent, to be aware of the fact that it's hard to generalize. We are talking about a phenomenon which could change depending the time and the spaces and the moments and the context and many, many things. This is very important. And I would like to just end my brief comment on the fact that our colleague Mustafa highlighted the importance of education. This is very important, how education could be a part of the solution of this phenomenon, which has nothing to do with Islam, with many things, because the complexity is such in such complexity that we cannot make a real correlation between some phenomena. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fouad. George, please. Can you give the mic back? It's right there.
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel. I have a question for Mustafa with regard to the experience of Salafism, non-violent Salafism like Salafiyya al-Ilmiyya, fighting jihadi Salafism. How would you assess this? Do you think it's a successful case in Libya? And I will take the same question to Alexander, because we always talk about the good guys, but then we don't know exactly who are the good guys. And would you consider a conservative, non-violent Salafi sheikh a good guy who might help in turning people away from violence? Because usually our good guys are less credible, while those Salafis, at least in Egypt, for example, Noor Party is claiming that give us a chance because we are more credible and we can argue against Salafi jihadism. How would you see this? Thanks.
It's a very relevant question, George. Thank you. Mr. Kardoudi, here to the front, very briefly, please, and here we will finish with...
My comment is for my Mr. Mustafa. Of course, I hope peace and stability in Libya, because it is a North African country. But your comparison between Morocco and Libya is not good for me. In Morocco, we have a king which has a legitimacy of 300 years. We had political parties. We had a relative freedom of press. In Libya, unfortunately, Gaddafi took the power, it's a military who took the power by force. There were no political parties, no freedom. So I think this comparison is not very good, but I hope really that Libya will find peace and stability. Thank you.
Thank you. To the front, if you can just keep it brief question or comment.
Merci beaucoup. Je parle au nom de la Fondation Assemblée des citoyens et citoyennes de la Méditerranée. Je suis très content d'être ici entre vous. Je vais exprimer brièvement les inquiétudes et les préoccupations des citoyens et citoyennes de la Méditerranée qui se trouvent dans un contexte de guerre et inégalité croissante. Et on voit une mer, notre mer, comme il devient un cimetière. Et du point de vue des propositions, c'est clair que ce que nous demandons, c'est plus de démocratie, plus de droits humains, une lutte réelle contre les inégalités économiques et sociales, et de telle façon que l'extrémisme et le terrorisme se trouvent sans base de manipulation de la conscience des jeunes. Donc ça se fait à travers l'action des institutions publiques et aussi à travers l'action de toute la citoyenneté qui est engagée avec cette réalité qu'on ne veut pas. Merci.
Merci. Was there a question that was... Okay, we're going to take very, very short questions. Over here. Yes, please. You need a mic for... and we'll go
We've
back
had
to-
14 speakers since this morning. Not a single speaker has mentioned the role of states, sponsors of terrorism. And I'm wondering, when you see terrorism at this industrial scale, when you see the kind of equipment that is being used, when you see 40 or 50 four-wheel drives that have chassis numbers, that are branded, this cannot be a simple ragtag army. Now, my question is, who are these parties and what is the level of support? How important is it? Is it a small level of support? Is it a medium level of support? Is a major level of support? And why is it that this dimension is excluded or forgotten in the debate? Thank you.
Well, that's a good question, and I think we will have to address it through this conference, not only this session, but yes, I think it's part of the taboos, maybe, and the responses that need to be given. The lady, sorry, I couldn't see the lady back there. And finally, we finish with you, and I am sorry we don't have more time if you want to have lunch. Thank you.
So it's a question and a comment to Mustafa. I'm Ina Rudolph from the Maghreb Economic Forum and also advisory board member of the Kennedy Foundation. I would like to point your attention to a project which we have implemented called Local Libya, or Nahna Libya Mahaliya. It's about empowering a diverse group of contributors from all over Libya to obtain the right tools through storytelling and to, let's say, underline a common identity. And I was wondering what kind of other state-driven projects are there to use culture for social reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you repeat the name of the project, please? Libya Mahaliya, local Libya. Okay. And finally, go there, this first row, yeah.
So much. Yeah, it works? Okay. Thank you so much for the panel. I'm Luca Gervasoni, Director of the International Institute for Nonviolent Action, currently supporting the establishment of an observatory to prevent violent extremism. I have one concern, two questions. Building on what my colleague just said, too often I feel that we use the term violent extremist as a kind of synonym of Islamic-linked terrorism. Okay? This is my concern. My question is, will you consider as violent extremists also Islamophobic movements in Europe that will go to the Iran, I don't know, to Omar? Will be Israeli settlers acting in Palestine, violent extremist movement or even terrorist movements? To Mustafa, what about authoritarianism, no? Considering the recent history of Libya, all the history of dictatorship that you suffer, considering that states can be also, according to the United Nations, can be also violent extremist groups, will you consider authoritarianism a violent extremist movement?
Okay, thank you. So, going back to the panel in reverse order, I ask you that in 1.5 minutes, please, if you can address the questions that were given to you.
Okay, I will try. Concerning the comparison with Morocco, I made the comparison to show that when you have a government like Morocco with the multi-party system and more civil society, reforms are successful. But when you have a totalitarian regime, then of course they will not accept reforms. This is the reason I chose the Moroccan example. Concerning Salafiyya al-Ilmiyya and the dialogue with groups that like jihadi Salafists, I think any kind of dialogue helps. In Libya in 2013, there was dialogues conducted between Salafiyya Hizb al-Nur of Egypt and Ansar al-Sharia, which is now considered a terrorist organization. Salafiyah who use violence. And the main debate and dialogue was Hizb al-Nur sees that joining democracy is not something against Islam, while Ansar Sharia, they believe democracy is against Islam. So any kind of reasonable dialogue is important. I'm not sure if it really made Ansar Sharia more moderate. I don't think so, but any reasonable dialogue that can moderate these extremists, I encourage it. Finally, the role of governments. Yes, governments play a role in fueling terrorism and violent extremism. In Libya now we are having our conflict, it is almost a proxy war. We have a few countries supporting one side and a few countries supporting the other side. And the ones who are suffering, the Libyan people. Both parties are supported with arms, even though there is arm embargo, with financing, with media outlets. By the way, the role of media in violent extremism and in conflicts is really, really huge. Therefore, yes, you are right. In Libya, if external interference and external governments stop nourishing both parties, I think we'll build peace in a short period of time. Thanks.
There wasn't a question to me, but my thing all the time is today's solution is a tomorrow problem if this solution are short vision. Three main things. The state in the Arab world did not implement good policies. The politicians talk very short policies, like the Israeli siege in Gaza. Gaza used to be a very liberal place like Europe. Now it's completely different, because they put siege and people are unable to get out. So what do you expect from people who have been in prison without no when and why? We are in prison without no when, we'll be released, and why? We are punished by somebody else's mistake. And the third element is the education. Our education is very bad. I told you, I'm Palestinian, our Jesus is Palestinian, I'm proud to be brother to Jesus, but we were not told in our education just Jesus Palestinian. Or we have Christian in Gaza and we have a very beautiful church in Gaza City, 1400 years old. So we didn't learn how to be tolerant with others. I don't like to blame others. Europe policy was not good, but I like to blame us. We didn't do enough, and our authority, our national project did not do enough, did not meet the minimum. And the EU, who support Palestinian Authority blindly, they are to be blamed because they don't question them anything. They just give them 400 million euro a year without any questions. So we have to do the job ourselves. Thank you.
I'll focus on the question, who are the good guys and should we work with, for example, Salafists. Now in the EU context again, right? I'm not speaking for Pakistan or Libya, EU context. Should we engage with, for example, Salafists that are non-violent and are speaking out against the so-called Islamic State in the field of prevention, disengagement or de-radicalization? To me, this is a legitimate question, but I would ask back, should we work with Pegida or right-wing extremist organization in the prevention, de-radicalization or disengagement of neo-Nazi groups? Should we send young people who sympathize with right-wing extremism to a right-wing organization that says, yeah, your beliefs are right, the enemy is the Jews and the West and capitalism and democracy and the EU and everything, they're really all terrible and they are responsible for your inner suffering, but don't fight now. And that's what many Salafis say. It's not the time. There are different strands in Salafism, of course. But I would not bring youth towards an ideology only because they're sympathizing with it and bring them in contact. Because if we turn it around and say, would we bring them to right-wing extremists or populists to prevent something, I would say, everybody would say, of course not. But for some reason, we consider that working with political Islam is a solution, while we say with political right, working in prevention is not a good idea. That's a bit confusing to me sometimes. The good guys are the ones who are not the bad guys. And the bad guys are the ones who want to replace our societies in Europe, societies, with a caliphate or an Aryan superstate or a workers' paradise, whatever communist fantasies, any utopia that wants to get rid of what we have. These are the bad guys. And it's rather easy to find out what people are really after if you read what they write and you hear what they say and you look at what they do. And then you can make that judgment. It's harder to have a list of the good guys because there's a gray area and a variety. But those who want to overcome our liberal democracies in Europe and replace them with some authoritarian style with religion or without religion, these are the bad guys. And we can talk to them, but we shouldn't fund them, right? We shouldn't empower them. We shouldn't introduce them to youth or others. We have to figure out smart ways how to contain them because they're not going to go away. Terrorism cannot be defeated. Extremism cannot be defeated. It can be managed. It can be dwarfed. It can be made small. But in the history of humanity, we always had extremism, and we just have to get better again at preventing and fighting it.
Thank you, Alexander. There's an announcement for us by Emmanuel, but before that, please join me in thanking all our panelists for the very interesting and rich debates.
Thank you, Haitham, and in addition to your thanks, our thanks also go to you and Miguel for the very efficient chairing of this morning, and to all the speakers of this morning. A few practical announcements for this afternoon. First, there is a family picture on that very floor right now. Okay, so this is on the left-hand side when you leave this room. Then there will be a standing buffet downstairs. Okay, at the ground floor. We would kindly ask you to all go to the rooms of the working sessions at a 3:15. Okay, because some of you will then leave. And we want everyone to have the chance to talk in these working sessions. Okay, so 3:15, 3 working sessions start. One is there on the first floor, and 2 others are on the ground floor. From after the working sessions, we'll all walk together to the harbor. The restaurant of tonight will be by the port of Barcelona, so that will be somewhere between 5 and 6. Okay. Thanks again for everyone, so speakers, chairs, and everyone in the room. Thank you. Right after the working sessions.
Yeah, but
so we'll all go together.
But if the working sessions stop in different times.
No, they all stop at the same time.